They raised daughters in silk only to erase their names before the ink could dry. Behind every refined gesture was a life suspended between privilege and denial, shaped by lessons meant to polish, but never to legitimize. Their stories drift through history like unclaimed shadows, present in every household, yet absent from every record. Tonight, we step into the quiet world of the daughters who were taught to be correct, but never allowed to belong. So, before you feel comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Only if your heart truly wants to. If you do like it, leave a little comment letting me know what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights. Adjust the pillow to fit your head. Maybe turn on a fan to create a relaxing atmosphere. And let's begin this journey together tonight. If one were to watch a child born into this half-lit corner of Tudor life, the first thing they would notice is the silence that surrounds her name. She grows in rooms furnished like a noble household. Yet nothing in those rooms truly belongs to her. The linens are soft, the floors are polished, and the servants are trained to move quietly. But the space itself feels borrowed, as if the walls understand that her presence is temporary. She is dressed neatly, taught gently, and corrected with care. But each gesture is delivered with an invisible boundary. The people around her behave as though they carry a secret inside their sleeves, something that shapes the way they look at her without ever speaking it aloud. She learns early that her world depends on courtesy. Adults lower their eyes when she enters, not out of respect, but out of caution. They offer small smiles, polite nods, and carefully measured phrases. No one tells her why they behave this way. A child does not need a formal explanation. She feels it in the distance between herself and everyone else. Even affection must be handled delicately, as though too much of it might expose something that must remain hidden. The lessons she receives are thorough, but they come wrapped in hesitation, the kind that suggests her future depends on remaining perfectly composed. She follows a daily routine meant to resemble that of a noble daughter. Tutors arrive punctually, carrying their books and instruments. They teach her reading, scripture, and the graces expected of a young lady. They correct her posture, her diction, her gestures, all with an almost ceremonial devotion to precision. Yet beneath their guidance lies a quiet restraint. They shape her into someone who looks refined but remind her, without ever saying the words. That refinement does not guarantee belonging. She performs well because she must. Skill, she learns, is the only shield she has. Meals are taken in small, orderly rooms where the atmosphere remains calm. She eats from pewter plates, not silver. Her chair stands slightly apart from the others, as though the position at a table could reflect the position in the world. She observes everything. Who is allowed to speak freely? Who whispers? Who watches the door? Children usually imitate what they see, but she is trained to interpret. She senses that her life is stitched together by agreements she never witnesses, decisions made by adults in places she will never enter. There is no conversation about her father. She hears his footsteps sometimes in the hallway, or a door closing somewhere far away. But she is told nothing more. The household staff treat his presence as weather, felt, not discussed. When he appears, the air tightens. When he leaves, his absence is folded back into routine. She learns to accept this without question. Questions, in her world, are signs of danger. Her mother tries to create warmth around her, but it is a warmth tinged with vigilance. The woman who birthed her is both privileged and vulnerable, living at the edge of approval and dismissal. The child sees this duality without understanding it fully. She notices the sudden quiet when her mother receives a message, the way servants exchange glances, the tension that settles into the house like dust. It teaches her something subtle but permanent. Everything offered to her can be taken away just as easily. The clothing she wears reveals this contradiction. Her gowns are of fine fabric but simple cut. She looks like a young lady, but not enough like one to be mistaken for something she is not. Each garment tries to balance visibility and invisibility. A delicate tension she begins to internalize. When she stands before a mirror, she does not see a future noblewoman. She sees a figure caught between categories, polished but undefined. She becomes fluent in silent observation. She notices how visitors hesitate before acknowledging her. She senses when the household shifts mood based on rumors or letters. She hears the words people avoid, the pauses that reveal more than the sentences. Childhood curiosity turns into disciplined awareness. She learns that safety is found in knowing what others do not say. Outside the house, her world is narrower. Walks are supervised, interactions controlled. The outside world might ask questions, and her guardians cannot risk those questions leading to uncomfortable truths. She studies the other children they pass. Girls, with official places in respected families. They hold themselves with certainty, unaware of how effortlessly the world makes room for them. She walks beside her attendants quietly, feeling the shape of the space she does not occupy. As she grows, the contradiction within her life becomes sharper. Everything she learns suggests she is being prepared for refinement, but nothing she observes suggests she will be allowed to use it freely. Education becomes a form of containment rather than opportunity. Mannered behavior becomes a mask she must hold in place. She is close to privilege, but not permitted to claim it. She is raised to resemble a noble daughter, but never addressed as one. She realizes eventually that she lives suspended between two truths. She is too polished to belong among the common children, and too illegitimate to stand with the noble ones. This awareness settles quietly, shaping her thoughts without bitterness, simply as fact. In this suspended state, she becomes skilled at existing without leaving a trace. Her childhood is not bleak, but it is weightless, as though every step rests on a floor that could shift at any moment. Her life is respectable, structured, and outwardly peaceful. But beneath that peace lies a certainty. She was raised in comfort without ever being promised a place within it. It leaves a soft weight behind, the kind that lingers when a life appears secure, yet rests on nothing solid. There is still much around her childhood that remains untouched and waiting. And somewhere, in that quiet distance, a hidden beginning slowly reveals its own truth. There is a certain stillness in the way her beginning is handled, a kind of quiet arrangement made by adults who understand that a single name written in the wrong place could alter every step of her life. Her birth is recorded in a vague hand, if it is written at all, leaving gaps large enough for entire truths to disappear through. Those who manage such details know precisely what they are doing. They choose their words carefully, remove what must not be seen, and allow ambiguity to stand where acknowledgement should have been. It creates a life that begins not with celebration, but with caution. She is placed in a house that resembles a well-kept extension of the court, yet it sits just far enough away to feel unclaimed. Everything about it is arranged to shelter her without drawing attention. The servants who tend to her know the nature of the arrangement, though they seldom speak of it directly. Their silence becomes the foundation of her early world. They care for her as instructed, keeping her fed, warm, and properly dressed. But in their movements, there is a careful distance, as though they understand she occupies a space that is neither fully accepted nor entirely denied. Visitors arrive rarely, and when they do, they behave as if they are passing through a room filled with fragile glass. Their voices are lower, their steps controlled, their eyes moving quickly as if searching for something they cannot mention. She is never presented formally to anyone. Instead, she watches figures come and go, sensing their unease without understanding its source. Childhood should be filled with questions, but she learns early that answers are not the currency of her life. Her mother sees her in brief intervals. These visits hold a tenderness laced with fear, as if affection itself must be measured. The woman holds her closely, but her eyes remain alert, always listening for footsteps beyond the door. There is no open conversation about why these moments are hidden. Yet the secrecy shapes them. The child feels it without having the words for it. Even comfort, it seems, must be kept quiet. The absence of a father becomes another silent structure within her existence. His name is not spoken in her presence. When he enters the house, the atmosphere changes with such precision that she can sense it even from another room. Doors open and close more softly. Servants straighten their posture. Conversations pause. And though she may catch a glimpse of him from a distance, the space between them is deliberately maintained. She grows used to the idea that proximity does not equal presence. Her early surroundings are filled with objects chosen carefully to avoid scrutiny. Nothing is too ornate, yet nothing is common. It is a balance, meant to impress no one, while denying nothing. A child raised here would not look impoverished, but neither would she resemble a legitimate heir. The ambiguity becomes part of her identity long before she understands what identity means. She grows surrounded by qualities that do not claim her. There are moments when she senses the contradictions. She notices how servants avoid certain explanations, how they choose different words depending on who enters the room. She sees the way faces shift when her mother's name is mentioned. These small details accumulate slowly, shaping her understanding not through instruction but through atmosphere. She learns that some truths exist only in the spaces between sentences. As she becomes more observant, she begins to understand that her life is built on deliberate concealment. Nothing is openly denied, yet nothing is affirmed. Her existence flows quietly alongside official records without intersecting them. The world outside continues unaware of her. And perhaps that is the intention. For a child in her position, anonymity is considered protection, even if it feels like erasure. The household maintains a rhythm that supports this hidden beginning. Letters are carried discreetly. Supplies arrive without signatures. Conversations shift when she enters a room. The people around her behave as though they are maintaining a fragile balance that must not be disturbed. She becomes part of that balance simply by being alive. And so her early life unfolds without a public name, without recognition, without the weight of formal belonging. This does not make her life empty, but it does make it quiet in a way that leaves its mark. She grows within boundaries she never chose, shaped by decisions she never witnessed. It leaves a muted impression, the kind that settles when a life begins in careful shadows rather than open acknowledgement. There is still more to uncover in the quiet structure surrounding her earliest years, and somewhere within that fragile silence, a deeper truth waits to surface. The course of her life shifts quietly around her mother long before she understands why. Every gesture, every expression, every change in tone from the adults nearby reveals how much depends on a woman who herself stands on uncertain ground. The mother's presence brings a certain warmth into the household, but it is a warmth shadowed by risk. Those who serve the house watch her carefully, not out of devotion, but out of calculation, as though they are measuring how long her influence might last. The child grows within this fragile balance, sensing that stability is not something given, but something borrowed. Her mother's status determines whether the doors around her remain open or begin to close. When the man whose approval sustains the household shows interest, everything brightens in a restrained way. Meals are prepared with greater care. The staff move with quieter urgency, and her mother holds herself with a calm that seems practiced. On such days, the child feels a gentler rhythm in the house, as if everyone believes the arrangement may continue a little longer. But this calm is never secure. Attention can fade quickly, and with it the entire structure of their lives. When the mother falls out of favor, the shift is immediate. The atmosphere sharpens, as though the air itself becomes aware of their vulnerability. Servants speak more softly. Some avoid the eye of the child altogether. Supplies arrive with less frequency. The mother becomes quieter, her steps slower, her hands lingering over objects she once handled with confidence. The child watches this decline without fully understanding the forces behind it. Yet she feels the ground beneath her soften. Nothing in her world is guaranteed. There are moments when the man visits, and even from a distance, she can sense the weight he carries within this house. His presence controls the rhythm of their days. If he speaks kindly, the household breathes easier. If his mood is cold, everything contracts. The child recognizes him not as a father in any traditional sense, but as a distant figure whose decisions shape her survival without acknowledging her existence. She becomes aware that her life can shift because of choices made behind doors she will never enter. Her mother tries to shield her from the instability, though the effort itself exposes how fragile their security is. The woman teaches her calmness, restraint, and the careful art of avoiding notice. These lessons come not from ambition, but from fear. A child born in such circumstances must learn to move gently through her own home, for even the smallest misstep could draw unwanted attention. The mother's protection is real, but it is limited by the boundaries imposed upon her. There are days when the house feels suspended, waiting for news that never comes. The silence on those days teaches the child more than words ever could. She begins to understand that affection, however sincere, cannot hold back uncertainty. Her mother's position is determined by a man's shifting interest, and the child's future is a reflection of that precarious dependency. She grows accustomed to living within conditions that may alter without warning. The staff, too, behaves differently depending on her mother's standing. When the woman is in favor, they offer small courtesies, gentle smiles, and timely assistance. When her favor wanes, their gestures become mechanical, their politeness thin. No one is cruel, but the withdrawal of warmth is unmistakable. The child learns to read these subtle changes and to recognize that every kindness extended toward her is, in truth, directed toward her mother's position. In this environment, she learns the unsettling truth that affection is conditional. Comfort, education, and even safety can depend on the persistence of a relationship in which she plays no role. She watches her mother navigate this reality with a mixture of grace and exhaustion. The child cannot help but notice how the woman's face changes when she believes she is unobserved. An expression caught between hope and resignation. It is a look that quietly imprints itself on the child's understanding of life. What she comes to realize, slowly and without drama, is that stability is not hers to claim. The structure of her world rests entirely on negotiations made elsewhere. She has no title, no guarantee, no formal promise. Her mother's position can elevate her or erase her, and neither outcome reflects her own worth. She stands at the intersection of privilege and disposability, shaped by circumstances she cannot influence. This understanding settles into her like a long shadow. She learns not to expect certainty, not to assume protection, and not to believe that comfort will last. Her life becomes an exercise in quiet vigilance, taught not by words, but by the shifting ground beneath her mother's feet. It leaves a faint weight behind, the kind that forms when a child's future depends on forces she can neither see nor shape. There is still more to uncover in the unstable ties that hold her small world together. Somewhere within that quiet tension, a deeper truth begins to gather at the edges. Her early years unfold inside houses that sit somewhere between privilege and obscurity, places furnished well enough to suggest refinement, yet marked by an absence that cannot be ignored. These homes are arranged with care, their rooms polished and their corridors quiet, but they do not carry the authority of a noble residence. They feel borrowed, as though each piece of furniture has been placed with the understanding that it may one day be removed without explanation. The child moves through these spaces with the instinctive caution of someone who senses that the ground beneath her is never entirely solid. She learns quickly that these houses do not belong fully to anyone. They are maintained by staff who understand the delicate nature of their work. Their gestures are composed. Their voice is measured, as if they must maintain the illusion of stability while knowing it is temporary. The child watches them and absorbs the quiet tension that shapes their movements. She becomes familiar with this atmosphere long before she learns the words to describe it. It is a life lived in a narrow space between recognition and secrecy. Outside, the world is divided clearly between the homes of the noble and the dwellings of common families. She fits into neither. When she sees children of high birth, she notices their ease, the way they speak without hesitation, their sense of belonging to structures older than themselves. When she observes the children of labourers, she sees a different certainty, one built on routine, familiarity, and shared struggle. She carries neither certainty. Instead, she stands at a distance from both worlds, shaped by a life that mirrors privilege while lacking its foundation. Daily routines reflect this in-between state. Tutors arrive regularly, yet their presence lacks the ceremony found in noble households. Lessons are given in rooms that are tidy but unadorned, offering an environment that feels purposeful but never grand. She is taught skills meant to polish her, but not to elevate her. With each lesson, she absorbs the quiet message that refinement is necessary for survival, not recognition. It becomes a form of armor rather than a path. Even the servants treat her in a way that reveals her unusual position. They show her respect, but it is a careful respect, one that acknowledges her upbringing without granting her the authority of status. They guide her gently to correct her posture and adjust her clothing, but they do so from a distance that cannot be bridged. She learns to interpret these boundaries, sensing the line between care and caution. Every gesture teaches her how to exist without claiming space. The homes she lives in change from time to time, each move carried out with quiet efficiency. She learns not to grow attached to rooms, windows, or gardens. Each new place resembles the last, neither humble nor grand, arranged to protect her, yet never fully hers. These shifts create a rhythm of uncertainty that settles into her childhood like a muted melody. She becomes adaptable, not by instruction, but by necessity. There are moments when she senses the weight of being unanchored. She watches other children speak proudly of where they come from, of family lands or long-standing neighbourhoods. She cannot offer such stories. Her homes exist in spaces unspoken, chosen for convenience rather than heritage. She learns to describe them vaguely when asked, offering descriptions that reveal nothing. Her life is built on maintaining the edges of things, not their centre. Inside these in-between houses, she becomes skilled at noticing details. She observes the hesitation in a servant's step, the quiet exchange of glances between attendants, the tone of conversations that stop abruptly when she enters. This awareness becomes part of her identity. She grows up alert to shifts that others might overlook, sensing when the stability of the household is thinning, when a decision made elsewhere might soon alter everything. Through all of this, she carries a subtle sense of displacement. The houses protect her, shelter her, and educate her, but they do not claim her. She learns to accept comfort without belonging, to sleep in a bed that may not be hers tomorrow, to walk through hallways that have no desire to remember her. It is not a childhood of hardship, but it is a childhood shaped by impermanence. With time, she understands that these homes were never meant to root her. They exist to hold her quietly, to keep her outside the public eye, while offering just enough refinement to prepare her for a future that remains undefined. The in-between spaces form the geography of her earliest memories, leaving her with a sense that she exists not within a world, but beside it. It leaves a gentle unease, the kind that settles when a childhood unfolds in places meant to protect without ever promising permanence. There is still more within these shifting rooms that waits to be traced. Something in the quiet movement of these temporary homes hints at a deeper uncertainty beneath her path. Instruction begins quietly, woven into the background of daily life, as if learning must occupy only the softest parts of the day. Tutors arrive with careful steps, carrying their books in a manner that suggests both duty and restraint. They never present education as a pathway toward recognition. Instead, it is introduced as a necessity, a series of quiet skills meant to shape a child who will never truly belong to the world she mirrors. Reading is taught slowly, each letter drawn with deliberate precision. Writing becomes a discipline rather than an expression, a way to demonstrate control more than thought. Scripture is recited, not as devotion, but as evidence of proper upbringing. Everything about this instruction feels intentional, measured, and quietly protective. The space where lessons take place reinforces this purpose. A small table near a modest window, a stack of carefully selected texts, a room that is neither bare nor distinguished. Such surroundings ensure that the child grows accustomed to refinement without ever assuming she is entitled to it. The tutors maintain this atmosphere carefully. They speak in low tones, avoiding unnecessary encouragement, as if praise might give her the wrong idea about the life awaiting her. Their expressions remain steady, even when she masters a task quickly. Progress is acknowledged only through continued work, never through celebration. In these daily lessons, discipline becomes the center of her world. Hours unfold through reading passages, copying lines, and practicing the gestures of polite conversation. Refinement is not taught as a right, but as an obligation. Even the correction of posture carries a subtle warning. Grace is a requirement for someone who must remain acceptable without ever being central. When she lowers her eyes at the appropriate moment or folds her hands neatly in her lap, the tutors note it silently. Such skills exist not to elevate her, but to prevent her from drawing attention. Occasionally, there are glimpses of what other children with secure places, are taught. Their lessons include discussions of estate management, political alliances, and the histories of families whose names carry weight. None of these topics enters this household. The boundaries around her learning remain firm. Instruction is limited to subjects that refine without empowering, polish without granting authority. This careful selection shapes her understanding of the world long before she realizes its implications. Despite these limits, the routine of learning brings a quiet order to her days. Books offer a steadiness absent from the rest of her life. Scripture provides structure, even if its moral weight is secondary to its social value. The act of writing gives her a sense of clarity, a way to impose form on thoughts she does not yet have permission to express. She leans into these tasks, not out of ambition, but out of habit, finding in them a small space where uncertainty briefly loosens its grip. The tutors, though respectful, maintain a distance that never fades. Their politeness is careful, their guidance controlled. They do not ask about her dreams, nor do they suggest any future where her learning might grant her a voice. Instead, they offer skills tailored to someone whose position requires caution. The message beneath every lesson is unmistakable. She must know enough to behave properly, but never enough to challenge the place assigned to her. Over time, she begins to sense the purpose behind this restraint. Knowledge becomes a silent investment, something given to ensure she can navigate a world that will not recognize her openly. It prepares her to exist smoothly in spaces that may not welcome her completely. It equips her to avoid mistakes that could draw unwanted attention. These lessons become tools for survival rather than steps toward opportunity. Even the rhythm of the school day reinforces this truth. Instruction is steady, predictable, and quiet. No moment is dramatic. No subject hints at a broader future. She learns not to expect unveiling or promise. Each day resembles the one before it, forming a long stretch of controlled preparation for a life that will demand composure more than aspiration. As she grows, The limits of her education become easier to see. She notices what is omitted from her lessons, the subjects others take for granted, but which never appear on her table. She understands that this silence is intentional. The world she is being shaped for will not ask for her opinions or decisions. It will ask only that she carry herself with enough grace to avoid becoming an inconvenience. Still, she gathers these lessons and holds them carefully. They give her the ability to read the expressions of others, to sense when a room changes, to move with quiet precision through uncertain spaces. They form the foundation of a life lived between acknowledgement and invisibility. What emerges from this long and muted instruction is not a sense of promise, but a sense of preparation. Education becomes a shield, a way to withstand the instability that shadows her existence. It is a quiet investment, indeed not in her future elevation, but in her future endurance. It leaves a subdued impression, the kind that forms when learning is shaped more by caution than by possibility. There is still more beneath these restrained lessons waiting to be traced. Somewhere in the quiet discipline of her training, a deeper layer of her uncertain path begins to take form. Education enters her life in a way that feels almost incidental, woven so quietly into the structure of her days that it seems less like preparation and more like concealment. Books are placed before her with deliberate care, and the lessons that follow carry a tone of measured restraint. Nothing about her learning is presented as a doorway to opportunity. Instead, it functions like a veil, a carefully arranged layer meant to soften the truth of her uncertain origins. Those around her understand this purpose, even if she does not. Each corrected word, each steadying gesture, each repeated exercise contributes to a version of her that appears composed enough to deflect questions no one wishes to answer. The tutors who guide her learning move with practiced subtlety. Their expressions remain steady, neither warm nor distant, as though trained to deliver refinement without encouragement. They approach their tasks with precision, offering instruction designed to polish rather than empower. Reading is taught with strict attention to clarity, ensuring she speaks without hesitation. Writing is shaped into a quiet discipline, its purpose rooted more in control than expression. Scripture becomes a demonstration of proper upbringing rather than spiritual devotion. The pattern is unmistakable. Knowledge is granted to her only in forms that smooth the edges of her identity. Rooms chosen for her lessons reinforce this intention. A window that provides enough light but little warmth. A desk that feels functional rather than personal. Shelves lined with selected texts, none of which hint at subjects reserved for noble birth. The environment feels slightly restrained, as though designed to prevent ambition from taking root. She learns to navigate these spaces with the awareness that each object, every book, every quill, every faintly echoing footstep, reflects a future that will not widen for her. Over time, the subjects she is allowed to study reveal the quiet structure shaping her path. She learns courtesy with meticulous detail, adopting gestures that signal refinement without authority. She practices needlework until her hands move with steady precision, producing patterns meant to display discipline rather than artistry. Music lessons are introduced not to cultivate talent, but to ensure she can meet the expectations of polite society without drawing attention. All of it forms a polished surface designed to distract from the gaps beneath. The omissions in her education speak as loudly as the lessons themselves. Topics tied to inheritance, land, or influence never appear before her. Discussions about lineage or governance remain outside her reach. She is shaped for grace, not leadership, for correctness, not assertion. The boundaries of her learning outline her place long before she fully understands its limits. She begins to sense these omissions, feeling them settle like faint shadows at the edge of each lesson. Even as a child, she notices the restraint in her tutor's behavior. Their voices contain no hint of expectation, no suggestion that her talents could lead anywhere beyond the narrow spaces designated for her. When she excels, Their acknowledgement is mild and practical, never celebratory. The absence of praise teaches her as much as the lessons themselves. She learns that intelligence must remain quiet. That skill must not invite notice. And that refinement must serve as a mask rather than a ladder. Occasional glimpses of noble children deepen her understanding. Their instruction carries a sense of inevitability, as though their futures are already shaped and simply need to be trained into them. Their lessons include discussions of power and responsibility, elements absent from her world. The contrast is stark. While they learn to step forward, she learns to remain unobtrusive. While they are guided toward recognition, she is guided toward invisibility. Yet despite these differences, she finds solace in the quiet rhythm of learning. Books offer a steadiness that the rest of her life lacks. The structure of lessons creates temporary order in a world shaped by secrecy. Writing allows her to arrange her thoughts even if she cannot express them openly. These small comforts anchor her, offering a sense of safety within boundaries she did not choose. Gradually, she understands that her education functions as compensation for the legitimacy she does not possess. Knowledge is meant to fill the void left by the absence of her father's name, shaping her into someone who appears whole enough to avoid scrutiny. She is trained to move through rooms with precision, to speak with measured composure, to carry herself in ways that allow others to overlook the truth rather than confront it. Her learning becomes the quiet architecture of a life built on discretion. As she matures, the purpose behind these lessons becomes clearer. She is not being molded for advancement, but for endurance. Her training prepares her to survive within the narrow space where she must exist, close enough to refinement to be acceptable, but distant enough to avoid claims of belonging. Education becomes the tool that allows her to navigate this impossible middle ground with grace. In the end, what she receives is not empowerment, but protection. Knowledge does not promise a future. It stabilizes a present shaped by fragility. Each skill she masters reinforces the delicate balance others have constructed around her. Her learning becomes a silent shield, strong enough to hold back questions, yet too thin to change her fate. It leaves a quiet understanding, the kind that settles when learning is meant to disguise absence rather than reveal possibility. There is more hidden within the layers of her careful training, waiting to be uncovered. Within that restrained silence, a deeper truth begins to gather quietly at the edges. Lessons offered to her begin to narrow as she grows, shaped by choices made long before she understands their meanings. Subjects presented with quiet consistency, music, needlework, and the careful study of etiquette fill her days with a rhythm that feels deliberate rather than expansive. These skills are taught with an unspoken certainty that they will define the boundaries of her future. Each lesson carries a sense of refinement, yet none suggests the possibility of authority. What she learns is meant to smooth her presence, not strengthen her position. Music becomes a central part of this training. She is guided through scales and simple compositions, her fingers taught to move steadily across the keys or strings. The purpose of these sessions is not artistic expression but poise. She is expected to play softly, to create sounds that please without drawing attention. The tutor's corrections are gentle but persistent, shaping her into someone who can perform gracefully in the background of gatherings she may never be fully welcomed into. Music becomes an exercise in moderation, a quiet symbol of the role she is expected to occupy. Needlework fills the quieter hours of the afternoon. Her hands learn the discipline of small, careful stitches, forming patterns meant to signal patience rather than creativity. The cloth she works on becomes a silent record of the restraint expected of her. Each completed piece is neat, orderly, and unremarkable by design. No one asks her to experiment or imagine. Perfection is measured by invisibility, an embroidered corner that blends rather than stands out. These hours teach her that contribution is valued only when it remains unobtrusive. Etiquette lessons extend this pattern. She studies posture, appropriate greetings, the correct distance to maintain in conversation, and the timing of a lowered gaze. These teachings form a structure of behavior that must appear effortless. Though it demands constant control, the tutors speak of grace, but it is a carefully confined version of grace, one stripped of confidence, leaving only composure. She learns how to occupy a room without claiming it, how to participate without imprinting herself upon the moment. These behaviors become instinct before she fully understands their purpose. The subjects she does not learn reveal as much as the ones she does. Politics, estate management, matters of inheritance. None of these cross her path. Her lessons avoid anything that could imply a future filled with decisions or responsibilities. Such fields are reserved for children born into legitimacy, not for those who must be shaped into silent complements within the spaces of others. The omissions are as instructive as the teachings themselves. They outline the limits of her life without needing to be stated aloud. This selective education is not harsh, but it is unmistakably confining. She becomes skilled in tasks designed to support, never lead. Everything she practices moves her toward the margins of noble society, preparing her to exist comfortably within roles that depend on discretion. By the time she begins to notice the pattern, the habits have already settled deeply into her. She speaks softly, moves carefully, and carries herself with the steady politeness expected of someone whose presence must never provoke questions. There are moments, subtle and fleeting, when she observes the contrast between her lessons and those of other children. A passing remark from a tutor, a conversation overheard through a doorway, a glimpse of study materials far more complex than her own. These fragments reveal the breadth of instruction available to those born into security. She recognizes, even without bitterness, that her education is meant to prepare her for usefulness, not influence. The understanding grows quietly within her, a truth she absorbs the same way she absorbs each disciplined stitch of her embroidery. Despite the constraints, she begins to find a certain comfort in the repetition of her training. The familiarity of the tasks brings order to days otherwise shaped by uncertainty. Music fills empty spaces with a calm that feels dependable. Needlework anchors her restless thoughts. The structure of etiquette gives her a framework through which she can navigate interactions she does not control. These skills, though limited, offer her a way to steady herself in a world that shifts according to decisions she will never be told about. Yet this steadiness carries a quiet sadness. She understands that her skills are chosen to ensure she remains agreeable, supportive, and forgettable. They polish her into someone who fits neatly into the expectations of others, not someone who shapes a path of her own. These carefully curated lessons teach her not who she might become, but who she must not appear to be. It leaves a restrained impression. The kind that forms when learning is shaped to keep a life in soft focus. There is more beneath these polished practices that continues to shape her quiet place in the world. Under the weight of these careful boundaries, another layer of her constrained identity begins to unfold. The contrast in her education becomes clearer as she grows, revealed not through direct instruction, but through what is quietly withheld. Lessons continue with the same calm rhythm each day, yet the shape of her learning remains narrow, deliberately trimmed of anything that might suggest authority. She is guided toward composure, not command. Any gesture that hints at confidence is softened immediately, corrected with gentle firmness until she returns to the posture expected of someone who must never stand too fully in her own space. The message settles into her slowly. She is being shaped for safety, not influence. Children of noble birth are taught how to direct others, how to navigate households and responsibilities that await them. None of this appears in her world. The idea of giving orders is not simply avoided, it is quietly erased. When she observes the behavior of noble daughters during brief encounters or passing glimpses, their ease with instruction is unmistakable. They speak with a certainty she has never been encouraged to form. a certainty rooted in their right to be heard. Her own lessons emphasize quiet compliance, ensuring her voice remains gentle enough not to disrupt any arrangement into which she may eventually be placed. Discussions of ownership never enter her studies. Land, inheritance, and household authority remain subjects reserved for those whose names guarantee a future. She learns instead about maintaining order, observing rules, and adjusting her behavior to suit others. Her tutors present these lessons with a steady calm, avoiding any suggestion that she might someday make decisions of her own. It is a subtle shaping of expectations, trimming possibilities until only the safest outlines remain. Even the structure of her days reinforces this difference. She practices tasks that refine her ability to blend in, not tasks that prepare her to oversee anything. Correct posture, careful speech, predictable movements, polite listening. There is no instruction on how to direct a room, only on how to avoid unsettling one. When she sits at a table, she learns where to place her hands. When she stands, she learns to occupy minimal space. When she speaks, she learns to measure her words so precisely that they leave no impression strong enough to provoke attention. These lessons are not cruel, but they are unmistakably restrictive. She feels the edges of them even before she can articulate why. The boundaries of her education form a quiet barrier between her and the legitimate daughters of noble families. While they grow into roles supported by the certainty of their lineage, she grows into a role built on navigating uncertainty without complaint. This difference becomes its own kind of truth, one she absorbs through repetition rather than explanation. Observation becomes her greatest teacher. She watches noble daughters give instructions without hesitation, their gestures swift and assured. She notices how servants respond immediately, not because of the child's behavior, but because of her name. These small moments accumulate in her mind, revealing a structure she is expected to live within, but never ascend. Her life is not shaped by entitlement, but by the need to remain careful. Safety depends on knowing where to step, when to speak, and how to avoid missteps that others may overlook without consequence. With time, she understands that her lessons are designed to protect her from the dangers of misinterpretation. A wrong word from someone in her position could be taken as insolence. A moment of assertiveness could be seen as overstepping boundaries. Her tutors guide her away from such risks with practiced subtlety, teaching her to navigate spaces where she must never appear threatening or presumptuous. She learns humility, not as a virtue, but as a survival skill. This shaping leaves her quietly aware of the distance between herself and those raised with legitimacy. While noble daughters learn to take up space, she learns to fold herself neatly into the spaces left by others. While they are taught to inherit, she is taught to endure. The contrast becomes a silent thread running through her days, binding her to a position defined not by her abilities, but by expectations placed upon her birth. Though she grows capable, intelligent, and attentive, her education consistently pulls her toward the background. She learns to exist with care, to maintain the fragile balance required of someone whose presence must never suggest claim or challenge. Her refinement becomes a gentle shield, helping her navigate a world that will never fully acknowledge her. It leaves a muted recognition, the kind that forms when learning shapes a life meant to stay just outside the edges of acceptance. There is more to be seen in the quiet limitations woven through her daily lessons. Beneath the calm surface of this restrained training, another truth begins to press softly against the boundaries around her. Those responsible for shaping her education make their decisions with a care that reflects more caution than ambition. Every tutor who enters her life has been selected with deliberate scrutiny, chosen not only for skill, but for temperament. They must be steady, predictable, and loyal to the quiet purposes of the household. No one with strong opinions. No one inclined to encourage curiosity. And certainly no one who might imagine a future for her beyond the one already outlined. Their presence is meant to guide her, but equally to guard her. She senses this long before she understands why. Lessons unfold in a measured rhythm that leaves little room for exploration. Subjects appear consistently limited, chosen less to broaden her world than to define its borders. She is taught what is necessary to maintain composure, to navigate social expectations, and to appear properly trained in the eyes of those who might someday judge her. What she is not taught stands out more sharply with each passing year. Anything that might invite ambition or open pathways to influence remains beyond reach. The boundaries of her learning are drawn with a firmness that needs no explanation. She notices the structure of her days is carefully maintained, as though each hour exists to prevent her from wanting more. Tutors redirect her when questions drift too close to forbidden topics. They keep their answers neat and contained, avoiding anything that might allow her to imagine possibilities outside the narrow space she occupies. Even their expressions hold a certain restraint, reflecting an understanding that curiosity in a child like her is not simply discouraged, it is dangerous. Control is woven through the smallest gestures. When she reads too quickly, she is told to slow down. When she lingers on ideas not included in her assigned texts, the lesson shifts without comment. When she demonstrates a natural talent for analysis or interpretation, the tutor calmly steers her back toward repetition, memorization, and the safer terrain of polite accomplishment. Rarely is she told what not to learn. Rather, the shape of her education makes those limits unmistakable. Over time, she realizes that the purpose behind these choices is not to obstruct her growth, but to contain it. Those who govern her learning seem to believe that too much knowledge could lead her to step beyond boundaries that others must never see her cross. She understands that ambition, in her situation, is not merely discouraged. It is considered a risk to everyone invested in maintaining the quiet order around her. Her life is shaped not by the expansion of possibility, but by the careful prevention of overreach. This form of control becomes part of her daily atmosphere. The rooms where she studies hold a quiet tension, as if the walls themselves know what must remain unspoken. Books offered to her carry no grand narratives of leadership or change. They are filled instead with lessons of patience, modesty, and restraint. Even scripture, though rich in stories, is taught to her in tones that reduce it to moral posture rather than spiritual questioning. Everything she encounters reinforces the notion that safety lies in staying small. As she grows more perceptive, the distance between her education and that of legitimate daughters becomes undeniable. They are taught to manage, to supervise, to anticipate responsibilities. She is taught to adapt, to comply, to avoid missteps. The difference is not in the quality of instruction, but in its intention. Their learning prepares them to step forward. Hers prepares her to survive the aftermath of decisions made by others. Occasionally, when she allows herself a private moment of reflection, she feels a quiet frustration settle over her. It is not anger, nor is it longing, but a muted recognition of what her tutors are preventing her from becoming. She senses that she could learn more, understand more, think more boldly. Yet she also knows that such freedom is not meant for her. The restraint surrounding her education is not a failing, it is a design. With time, she learns to navigate this controlled structure with a calm that mirrors her tutor's intentions. She asks fewer questions, not because she lacks interest, but because she understands the limits of what will be answered. She reads between lines instead of beyond them. The skills she gains: discipline, observation, careful composure, become her strength, even as they remind her of the space she cannot enter. In this quiet shaping, she becomes someone fashioned to move carefully through the world, guarded by the very knowledge she is denied. Her learning is both a gift and a boundary, keeping her safe while holding her firmly within the margins of acceptability. It leaves a restrained awareness, the kind that forms when guidance is designed as much to limit as to teach. There is more beneath this calm structure that continues to narrow the path laid before her. Under these quiet layers of supervision, a deep attention begins to settle into the edges of her life. The realization does not arrive in a single moment. Instead, it forms slowly, gathering in pieces she cannot name, settling into her years, long before she has the language to describe it. She grows up in rooms filled with gentle instruction and careful supervision. Yet beneath that structured calm lies an undercurrent she senses before she ever understands its source. It begins with small things, the way conversations pause when she enters, the way certain visitors soften their voices around her, the way her presence seems to require adjustment rather than welcome. She feels this shift even as a child, and the weight of it follows her quietly. Whispers are the first lessons she learns outside the ones her tutors give her. They drift through corridors, concealed behind half-closed doors and careful glances. She never hears full sentences, only fragments, only tones. But they carry enough meaning to unsettle her. Adults speak as though her existence occupies a delicate space, one that must be acknowledged only in private. When she approaches, the whispers fall away, replaced with polite stillness that tells her even more than the words she missed. Silence becomes its own form of truth. She grows sensitive to looks that last a fraction too long. Visitors who do not know her story glance at her with curiosity before shifting their expressions back to the appropriate neutrality. Those who do know look at her differently, some with pity, some with calculation, a few with thinly disguised discomfort. None of these reactions is explained to her, yet she understands they are tied to things never said aloud. The slight changes in posture, the small tightening around a mouth, the softening or hardening of a gaze. Every detail becomes part of her education. Children sense exclusion faster than adults admit, and she is no different. She notices how her placement in gatherings is carefully chosen, a step behind others, a seat slightly removed, a role quiet enough not to disturb the arrangement of legitimate relationships. She learns how to move without drawing attention, how to observe without intruding. These adjustments become habits, shaping her before she knows she is being shaped. By the time she recognizes the pattern, it already feels natural. Questions form in her mind, but rarely reach her lips. The few she attempts to ask are met with soft redirection, never scolding, never harsh, but firm enough to signal that some topics do not belong to her. She learns quickly that silence is safer than inquiry. Where other children push boundaries with the confidence of those who know they are protected, she pulls inward, relying on awareness rather than assertion. Silence becomes both her shield and her burden. There is a moment, early in her youth, when she tries repeating something she overheard, a phrase that seemed connected to her place in the household. The reaction is immediate, a subtle but unmistakable tightening in the room. Her tutor gently redirects her, placing a hand on her shoulder with a calmness that feels heavy rather than kind. She does not repeat such phrases again. She understands instinctively that some truths, even when whispered around her, are not hers to speak. As she grows older, she begins to understand the source of this careful treatment. She realizes that her presence carries a complication others would prefer not to confront directly. She is neither fully inside nor entirely outside the world she inhabits. Her existence requires delicate handling, and she learns to adjust herself accordingly. She does not resent this shaping. She simply absorbs it. The way children absorb weather, it becomes part of her atmosphere. The awareness settles into her quietly. Forming a steady knowledge, she no longer tries to escape. She recognizes that she must be cautious in ways others are not. She understands that her behavior reflects not only on herself, but on those tied to her existence in ways unspoken. She learns to move through rooms with measured steps, to hold her expressions gently, to avoid any action that might draw attention to the thinness of her status. Yet, this awareness also sharpens her perception. She becomes adept at reading nuances others overlook. the shift of a voice, the subtle decline of a head, the faint tightening of a jaw. These details allow her to navigate the world with precision, even if not with confidence. In this sense, her incomplete status becomes a form of early training, teaching her how precarious acceptance can be, and how easily it can be withdrawn. By the time she reaches adolescence, she no longer questions why she feels different. The feeling has grown with her, becoming something steady and unremarkable, like a shadow she recognizes without turning to look. She carries her silence with practiced ease, not because she lacks words, but because she knows when speaking would do more harm than good. It leaves a hushed certainty, the kind that forms when a child learns her place through tone rather than instruction. There is more to uncover in the quiet way she adapts to being both present and peripheral. Along with that muted awareness, another thread of her fragile identity begins to tighten. Speech becomes one of the earliest skills, shaped with deliberate care. Though the purpose behind this shaping is not to strengthen her voice but to soften it, she is taught how to form sentences with precision, how to respond with grace, how to maintain calm even when emotion rises beneath the surface. Every word she practices is polished, every tone measured, every pause intentional. Yet all these lessons lead her toward a single quiet truth. She may learn how to speak correctly, but she must never speak boldly. Her voice is a tool, not a right. The tutors who guide her through these lessons keep their approach gentle but firm. They teach her the subtleties of polite conversation, how to answer questions without revealing too much, how to express interest without implying expectation, how to offer opinions only when they pose no risk of appearing assertive. The instruction feels refined, almost elegant, yet beneath its surface lies a boundary she is never encouraged to cross. She becomes fluent in courtesy, but remains distant from influence. She learns quickly that communication is not about being heard, it is about maintaining harmony. Her words must not disrupt the hierarchy she lives within. Even small expressions of frustration are softened or redirected. When she attempts to speak with more confidence, her tutors quietly guide her back to gentler phrasing. When her tone edges towards certainty, she is reminded to temper it. The lesson is unmistakable. Correctness matters. Audibility does not. In social settings, this training shapes her behavior almost automatically. She speaks when spoken to, listens attentively, and offers responses constructed to avoid drawing attention. People praise her for being composed, for her delicate phrasing, for her thoughtful restraint. They call her well-mannered, never realizing that her manners are a defense as much as a skill. Politeness shields her from scrutiny. Precision protects her from misunderstanding. Meanwhile, she observes how legitimate daughters move through conversations with ease. Their voices carry naturally, not because they speak loudly, but because they speak from a foundation of recognized standing. They can clarify, correct, and even challenge without consequence. She cannot. A single misstep from her could be interpreted as presumption, and so she masters the art of speaking without ever stepping forward. Her silence doesn't come from a lack of intelligence. She is perceptive, thoughtful, and often aware of complexities others miss. But she learns early that sharing those insights can be risky. The more she understands, the more carefully she chooses her words. This caution becomes instinct. Her voice becomes something she holds rather than uses, something managed rather than expressed. Even her body language is trained to accompany this restrained communication. Her hands rest neatly. Her gaze stays controlled. Her posture conveys attentiveness without assertion. The entire performance is designed to create the image of a girl who moves gently through the world. It's a safety crafted from subtlety, a way to exist without provoking questions or expectations that might expose her origins. The refinement of her speech becomes both a skill and a quiet burden. She becomes deeply aware of how much must be left unsaid, When she listens to conversations around her, she can hear the layers beneath them, the alliances, the resentments, the carefully concealed intentions. But she also knows these observations cannot belong to her voice. They remain internal, forming a private understanding of a world she must navigate without the freedom to comment on it. Eventually, she recognizes that her ability to communicate delicately is not simply a product of education, it is a form of protection. Her finely measured speech keeps her from drawing attention to the delicate circumstances of her birth. It prevents questions. It maintains peace. It shapes the way she is perceived, allowing her to remain present without becoming threatening. Yet this restrained fluency also isolates her. She becomes skilled at maintaining conversations that reveal nothing of herself. She learns to hide emotion behind diplomacy, uncertainty behind calm phrasing, hurt behind composure. Her voice becomes a mirror that reflects what others expect rather than what she feels. And with each passing year, the distance between her inner thoughts and her spoken words grows quietly wider. In this careful shaping, her voice becomes the clearest symbol of her position, trained, refined, and always contained. It leaves a quiet ache, the kind that forms when a girl learns to speak beautifully while never fully being heard. There is more to uncover in the silence that shapes her place in the rooms she enters. Beyond that, practiced composure. Another tension begins to stir beneath the softness of her voice. Adolescence does not arrive for her with excitement or discovery. It settles in quietly, carrying with it a weight she sensed even as a child, but now begins to recognize with sharper clarity. The world grows larger around her, yet her own path remains narrow, framed by uncertainties she cannot name aloud. While other girls her age speak softly of futures shaped by arrangement and expectation, hers unfolds as something blurred at the edges, dependent not on her desires, but on choices made in rooms she will never enter. She feels herself suspended in a space where possibility exists only as rumor. Marriage becomes the first shadow she notices, trailing her steps. Not love, not companionship, just the inevitability of a union arranged to keep her safely placed and quietly contained. She hears fragments of conversations drifting from behind doors, mentions of suitability, of alliances too modest to attract attention, of families whose names offer stability rather than ambition. None of these discussions includes her voice. She learns early that her future partner will not be someone chosen for her happiness, but someone chosen for the convenience of those who must manage her existence without drawing notice to its origins. There is no dowry prepared for her, no formal inheritance to offer, no ledger entries marking her place within the family's assets. The absence becomes a silent but unmistakable truth. She understands that marriage, for someone like her, will depend not on wealth or status, but on the willingness of another household to accept her presence, under the condition that she brings nothing with her and demands nothing in return. This realization forms slowly, settling into her with a kind of dull ache. She knows she will enter her future with empty hands. What she does have, education, or refinement, quiet skill, is acknowledged but never celebrated as an advantage. These qualities are meant to make her agreeable, not desirable, no matter how carefully she moves, how precisely she speaks, how gracefully she performs the tasks expected of a young woman. They cannot compensate for the absence of formal legitimacy. She senses this in the way people speak about her, always with a gentle respect that stops just short of recognition. She occupies a place that must be managed, not honored. Dependence becomes a familiar presence in her thoughts. Every aspect of her future lies in the decisions of others: where she will live, whom she will marry, what life she will be expected to maintain. She is old enough now to understand that choice will rarely belong to her. She watches other young women speak confidently about expectations handed down through their lineage. She has no such anchor. Her life is shaped by circumstance, not entitlement. and she carries this difference quietly. Sometimes, late in the evening, she imagines what her life might look like if she were permitted to consider her own desires. The images are faint, almost tentative, fragments of independence, a home chosen rather than assigned, a life not predetermined by whispers and caution. But these thoughts never settle. They drift away as soon as she remembers the unspoken rules that have shaped her since childhood. Ambition is not forbidden to her, it is simply irrelevant. The unease of uncertainty grows more potent as she observes her changing body and the changing expectations placed upon it. She notices the way adults assess her with new calculation, no longer seeing her as a child, but as a future responsibility that must be placed somewhere discreet and stable. Their expressions reveal a concern she has no words for, one that reminds her that adolescence is not a time of expansion for her, but a narrowing of options. Every year brings her closer to a decision she will not make. She learns to carry her fear quietly, the same way she carries her refinement. She does not speak of it because she knows no one will answer honestly. Instead, she watches, listens, and gathers the pieces of truth scattered around her. She hears which families might consider a marriage of convenience. She understands which unions are unthinkable. She hears the tone of her mother's voice when the topic is raised. The mixture of hope, resignation, and calculation that reflects a life spent negotiating the boundaries of acceptability. In this quiet turmoil, she feels herself pulled between what she has been taught to be and what she suspects she will become. The gap between these two selves grows wider with each passing year. She senses that the path laid out for her is not cruel, but it is undeniably confining. It offers safety, yes, but at the cost of autonomy. It offers a place, but never a position. It gives her a future, but never freedom. As she steps deeper into adolescence, she understands the truth of her situation with a clarity that feels heavy rather than sharp. Her future is not a horizon she can walk toward. It is a corridor she must be guided through. She moves with the grace she was taught. But beneath that graceful exterior lies a trembling uncertainty she cannot share. It leaves a muted trembling, the kind that settles when a girl sees her future forming without her consent. There is more to witness in how she learns to carry possibility as something fragile and conditional. Beyond that growing awareness, another layer of quiet resignation begins to move into place. By the time she reaches the quiet midpoint between girlhood and adulthood, marriage no longer appears to her as a milestone, but as the only corridor forward. It hangs over her like a decision already made, though no one has spoken it plainly. The tutors who once shaped her speech now shift their focus toward comportment. The servants who once treated her with gentle amusement now study her with a different kind of calculation. Even the heir of the household seems to acknowledge that her future is narrowing toward a single outcome. She feels this shift with a weight that settles in her chest each morning. There is no illusion that she might marry into a world of grandeur. Her position forbids such hopes before they can form. She understands that noble families with recognizable names would never consider her, not because of any fault in her character, but because her birth threads through corridors kept deliberately dark. Instead, the possibilities presented to her are modest. Lesser nobles who require a well-mannered wife, but expect nothing more. Or loyal men tied to the household who might accept her presence with quiet practicality. These options are spoken of in softened tones, as if gentleness could mask the limits surrounding her. The idea of marrying a low-ranking noble is described to her as a respectable path. Such a man would offer a home, a name, and a life free from scandal. So long as she remained content with her role, she would be expected to manage small domestic tasks, maintain a polite demeanor, and never draw attention beyond what is appropriate. She listens to these descriptions with a calmness she has learned to maintain. Yet inside she feels the quiet ache of understanding that such a union would be built not on partnership, but on containment, the second path, marriage to a loyal, dependable man of the household. is offered as an equally valid outcome. These men are trustworthy, stable, and aware of the unspoken nature of her upbringing. They would not question her past, nor expect privileges she cannot provide. This option is often described as safe. Safe becomes a word she hears too often, a word that signals both protection and limitation. A safe life, she realizes, is not the same thing as a fulfilling one. What she does not hear is any suggestion that she might choose for herself. Suitors are not presented for her consideration. They are discussed among others, as though she is a detail to be placed, not a participant in the decision. Even when she is asked for her opinion, the question feels ceremonial, a gesture of courtesy rather than genuine inquiry. She answers carefully, knowing her words will not change the outcome, but may reveal too much if spoken without restraint. Hesitation becomes her closest companion. The thought of marriage feels heavy, not because she fears the men she might marry, but because she fears the loss of the small freedoms she still possesses. In the home where she grew up, she at least understands the rules. She knows where she can step and where she cannot. Marriage would mean learning a new set of invisible boundaries, guided by someone who may neither understand her nor care to. She wonders quietly whether she will be able to maintain the soft composure she has been taught when living under expectations shaped by someone else. Yet remaining unmarried is not presented as an option. A woman without a husband would require support, and support requires legitimacy, something she does not have. Marriage is not simply expected, it is necessary. Without it, she would exist in a space even more precarious than the one she already occupies. This truth settles into her with a mixture of resignation and clarity. She understands that marriage is the only recognized structure available to her, even if it feels like a structure designed to contain rather than to uplift. Her mother's expression sometimes reveals the quiet desperation behind these arrangements. She, too, knows what it means to navigate life without the protections of legal standing. She watches her daughter with a careful tenderness, offering guidance through glances more than words. There is fear in her eyes, not of scandal, but of instability. She wants her daughter placed somewhere steady, somewhere where the fragility of their position will not collapse under pressure. And so marriage becomes the solution both women must accept, even if neither chooses it freely. As she grows older, she begins to observe potential suitors with a kind of distant curiosity. She studies their manners, their tempers, the way they speak to servants, and the tone they use with their families. She knows she cannot be selective, but she also understands that her survival depends on choosing the gentlest cage available. The thought unsettles her, yet it shapes her perception of every interaction. A careless word or a harsh gesture becomes a warning. A soft smile becomes a possibility. She evaluates without appearing to, aware that her life may hinge on these quiet observations. What remains unspoken in all of this is the grief she carries for the life she will never have. She knows she will never marry for affection, never shape her own home, never claim her own path. Instead, she will be placed where she can neither disrupt nor embarrass. Her training has prepared her for this role, even if her heart resists its inevitability. She accepts the truth with a calmness that feels practiced rather than natural. And so marriage becomes not a celebration of the future, but a confirmation of the life she was always meant to inhabit. A life shaped by boundaries she did not create. It leaves a still heaviness, the kind that forms when a young woman sees her future narrowed into a single corridor. There is more to witness in how she learns to bend quietly toward the fate chosen for her. Across that gathering resignation, another fragile thread of her journey tightens into place. Learning, for here, shifts gradually from a quiet routine into something far more calculated. It becomes clear, even without being spoken aloud, that her education is not intended to open doors, but to prevent them from closing entirely. The refinement she has cultivated through years of instruction begins to feel like a currency. Subtle, fragile, and essential. Each skill she possesses serves a purpose, rooted not in ambition but in survival. She senses this transition in the way adults observe her, no longer assessing how well she performs a lesson, but how well she might endure the life awaiting her. Her intelligence becomes an offering of its own. The ability to read calmly, to write neatly, to follow complex instructions without question. These traits are quietly noted, quietly valued. They do not elevate her status, but they make her presence more manageable, more convenient, less troubling. She begins to understand that cleverness, in her situation, is not a path toward recognition, but a way to protect herself from uncertainty. A woman who can manage a household efficiently, who can hold conversations without offense, who can carry herself with composure under strain. Such a woman is considered useful, and usefulness may be the closest thing to safety she can secure. Her behavior becomes another layer of negotiation. Every gesture, every tone of voice, every expression must be chosen with care. She is aware that a misplaced word or an unintended silence could be interpreted as disrespect, presumption, or worse, a challenge to the delicate order that keeps her sheltered. And so she practices restraint until it becomes instinct, smoothing her reactions before they form. She avoids conflict not because she fears confrontation, but because she knows that any misstep could shift her position in ways she cannot repair. When she moves through the household, she does so with controlled awareness. She speaks with measured politeness, listens attentively, and carries herself with a calmness that feels both natural and forced. These behaviors are not simply manners, they are precautions, shaped by the understanding that people in her position must not provoke attention. She has learned over time that misfortune does not always announce itself. Sometimes it grows from a single moment of carelessness. Her composure becomes a shield against those unseen dangers. Knowledge, too, becomes a form of quiet armor. She studies people as carefully as she studies scripture. She observes which temperaments respond to softness, which require silence, which tolerate questions, and which recoil at them. This awareness allows her to navigate complexities others might overlook. She knows when to step forward and when to retreat, when to speak and when to disappear into the edges of a room. She learns the invisible rules of the spaces she inhabits, rules that legitimate daughters never need to consider. Her mother understands this dynamic intimately. In rare moments of private clarity, she tells her daughter that education is not meant to promise opportunity, but to preserve dignity where very little is guaranteed. These conversations are soft, on brief, and weighed down by things neither woman names directly. They reveal a truth that settles deep inside the young woman. Her life depends not on what she knows, but on how she uses that knowledge to tread lightly through a world that did not prepare a place for her. The more she grows, the more she sees how this delicate balance shapes her future. A well-spoken answer may ease suspicion. A refined gesture may soften judgment. A composed silence may prevent a question from being asked at all. These small acts become methods of bargaining, silent exchanges that keep her stable in an environment that might otherwise cast her aside. She begins to understand that each lesson she mastered as a child, every corrected posture, every softened tone, was preparing her for this quiet form of negotiation. She does not dream of advancement. She dreams of security. She hopes for a home where her origins will not be thrown back at her, for a marriage where she will not be belittled for the circumstances of her birth, for a life where her refinement might offer her a measure of peace. These hopes are modest, en fragile, and yet they feel immense to her. Education becomes the closest thing she has to leverage, a way to assure others that she will not disrupt their world if they allow her a small, steady place within it. At times, she wonders what her life might have been if her learning had been meant to empower rather than contain. She senses the potential in herself, the ability to understand, to organize, to lead quietly. But she also understands that this potential is not the purpose of her instruction. Her learning is shaped by the need to keep her in the shadows without letting her fall completely into them. It is a lifeline woven from restraint rather than possibility. And so she uses her education with a kind of deliberate caution, knowing that it is both her shield and her single means of negotiating a place in a world that recognizes her only when it must. It leaves a muted steadiness, the kind that forms when knowledge becomes less a promise and more a quiet shield. There is more to trace in the way she learns to barter her refinement for a fragile sense of security. Along the edge of that controlled composure, another fold of her constrained future begins to take shape. The presence of her father's family lingers around her life like a shape seen through fog, visible, influential, but never fully reachable. She grows up aware of them long before she meets any of them, aware of the weight their name carries, aware of the distance that name places between them and her. Their influence touches her in subtle ways, the quality of her tutors, the quiet protection extended when whispers grow too loud, the resources that appear without explanation. Yet none of these gestures come with acknowledgement. Support arrives without recognition, as though her existence must be maintained without being affirmed. She learns early that the line between being noticed and being named is one she must never cross. Her connection to that family is treated as a matter of delicate housekeeping rather than kinship. They may ensure she is cared for, but they do so from behind curtains, through intermediaries, and with a precision meant to avoid drawing any unwanted attention. It becomes clear that she belongs to them only in the shadows, where truths can be maintained without being declared. Legitimacy remains the barrier she cannot pass. She is never referred to as a daughter, never included in formal records, never granted the kind of recognition that would allow her a place in public ceremonies or family gatherings. The absence is not cruel, it is administrative. Her existence complicates appearances, and appearances must remain clean. She senses this unspoken rule long before she understands its ramifications. When she hears her father's name spoken with reverence by others, she listens with a quiet ache, knowing she will never speak it the same way. Occasionally, she encounters distant relatives, an aunt visiting the household, a cousin passing through, a noble guest with subtle ties to her parentage. These interactions carry a strange formality, as though everyone is participating in a quiet performance. They speak to her politely, warmly even, but with a restraint that reveals too much. Their eyes flicker with recognition, but settle into neutrality, preserving the arrangement that keeps her on the margins. They do not treat her unkindly, they simply treat her as something undefined. In her earliest years, she assumes this distance is normal. Only later does she realize that other children are introduced proudly to relations, guided into the fold of their lineage with ceremony and affection. She observes the difference from afar, how legitimate daughters walk beside their fathers during events, how their names are spoken confidently in front of others, how their roles are affirmed through public rituals. She sees them step into circles she will never be invited to, circles that require a legitimacy she does not possess. Despite the distance, gestures of support continue to reach her. A better gown appears before a significant gathering. A tutor with rare skills is assigned to her without explanation. A difficult situation resolves itself quietly, as though someone has intervened on her behalf. These gestures remind her that she is not forgotten, only hidden, but the help comes with its own sting. It confirms that she matters enough to protect, but not enough to claim. The ambiguity of her position becomes clearer as she ages. She is too connected to be dismissed entirely, yet too inconvenient to be acknowledged openly. She exists between worlds, not a servant, not a noble, not illegitimate enough to be ignored, yet not legitimate enough to belong. The contradiction forms a quiet tension within her, shaping her understanding of her place in ways her tutors never teach directly. She becomes skilled at reading the subtleties of behavior, how people adjust their tone when referencing her father's household, how carefully they avoid certain discussions, how deliberately they maintain polite distance. These clues allow her to map out the boundaries around her life. She comes to understand that her father's family protects her, not out of affection alone, but out of necessity. Her presence must be safeguarded, because exposure could unravel arrangements they rely on. Ceremonies and celebrations further emphasize her exclusion. When important events take place, noble weddings, seasonal gatherings, religious rites, she stands at the edges, if she is allowed to attend at all. She watches from a distance as people move through structured rituals that affirm their place in the lineage. She does not resent them. She simply feels the quiet throb of understanding that such spaces are not built for her. She learns to hold herself with composure, even when the ache grows sharper. Her mother navigates these complications with practiced grace, offering her daughter fragments of reassurance without making promises. She explains that some relationships must remain behind closed doors, not because they are shameful, but because they challenge the structures others depend on. These words settle into the young woman with a mixture of comfort and sorrow. She understands that her mother carries her own version of this burden, a life lived near legitimacy, but never welcomed into it fully. With time, the young woman accepts that her connection to her father's family will always remain suspended in this ambiguous space. She may receive help, protection, and consideration, but she will never receive acknowledgement. She walks carefully along the edge of a lineage that both includes and excludes her, aware that even a slight misstep could disrupt the delicate balance that keeps her safe. In the quiet of her room, she sometimes allows herself to imagine what it would feel like to be named without hesitation, to be welcomed into the lineage that shapes her life from afar. These thoughts remain soft, fleeting, and quickly folded away. She knows they belong to dreams, not to the world she inhabits. It leaves a subdued sorrow, the kind that forms when belonging is offered only through shadows. There is more to observe in how she learns to live parallel to a family that cannot claim her openly. Along that fragile distance, another thread of her uncertain identity begins to tighten. The more she grows into the refinement she was taught, the more she begins to resemble the very world that will never fully accept her. It happens gradually, through years of polished instruction, careful manners, and quiet discipline. Her posture reflects the poise of noble daughters. Her speech carries the same measured grace. Her clothing, though never as fine, is chosen to echo the style expected of young women of rank. She moves through rooms with a quiet elegance that would be indistinguishable from legitimacy, if appearances were the only truth. Yet step she takes toward that resemblance becomes another reminder of the distance she can never cross. People notice her refinement, but they notice its limits as well. Compliments arrive, wrapped in restraint. A guest might remark that she carries herself almost like a lady of noble birth, or that her composure nearly matches that of a legitimate daughter. These words appear kind on the surface, but their edges reveal the reality beneath them. She is close enough to be compared, but not close enough to belong. Every gesture she perfects places her in a space that is polished yet unreachable. Her appearance becomes the clearest echo of this contradiction. As she matures, her features take on a delicacy admired in noble families. Graceful lines, controlled expressions, and a composed stillness. But admiration quickly softens into caution. She looks the part, but the part is not hers. People observe her with eyes that acknowledge resemblance while rejecting equivalence. They recognize the refinement, but not the right behind it. The more she fits the mold, the more firmly she is kept outside it. Her behavior follows the same pattern. She greets guests with courtesy, manages conversation with subtle skill, and carries herself with an attentiveness learned from years of disciplined training. Yet whenever she stands near legitimate daughters, the contrast becomes a quiet but painful presence. They are encouraged to step forward, to take space, to demonstrate their confidence. She is reminded, through words, glances, and unspoken rules, to remain one step behind, not because she lacks grace, but because she lacks a name. Events and gatherings only sharpen this divide. When she walks into a room, she knows exactly where to stand, close enough to serve a purpose, yet far enough to avoid confusion. If her poise draws attention, someone gently redirects it. If her appearance mirrors that of a noble guest, people adjust their tone, their questions, their assumptions. They do not ask who she is. They ask to whom she belongs. Her refinement, instead of granting her presence, becomes a marker of her exclusion. There are moments when she catches her reflection and sees how carefully she has been shaped. She looks like someone who should have a recognized place in the world, someone who might step into a public role or carry a lineage forward. But these moments are fleeting, dissolved by the reality that no matter how closely she resembles legitimacy, she cannot claim it. Her reflection becomes an image of what she has been crafted to appear, not what she is permitted to be. This tension grows heavier as she becomes more aware of it. She notices how people watch her with a mixture of respect and uncertainty. She notices how servants treat her with deference, but never with the instinctive loyalty reserved for true-born members of the household. She notices how nobles look past her, even as they acknowledge her presence. The world around her recognizes her refinement while denying her status. Her polished exterior becomes an unintentional reminder of the boundary she must never attempt to cross. Elegance, for her, is not a pathway but a warning. The more perfectly she mirrors noble behavior, the more firmly others insist on keeping her in the shadow of legitimacy. Her resemblance becomes uncomfortable for them, a quiet disturbance in an order they need to preserve. They respond with subtle adjustments, seating arrangements, introductions, and the tone of their greetings, all designed to reinforce the difference between appearance and acceptance. She understands this dynamic instinctively. It shapes the way she moves, the way she speaks, the way she chooses her place in a room. Every polished gesture reminds her that she is expected to embody refinement without ever claiming the authority that usually accompanies it. Her discipline becomes a form of silent obedience. Her elegance, a quiet surrender to a structure she cannot challenge. What makes the pain sharper is that her efforts are not failures. They are successes. She has become everything she was taught to be: composed, articulate, attentive, and gracious. But these very qualities highlight the impossibility of her position. She cannot fail in refinement, yet she cannot succeed in belonging. Her likeness to nobility becomes a mirror that reflects both her achievements and her limitations. Still, she continues to perfect the role, not because she believes it will grant her acceptance, but because it grants her stability. Refinement is the only currency she can rely on, even if it never grants her the legitimacy she resembles. Her life becomes a delicate balance between looking the part and remaining apart, a balance maintained through discipline and quiet endurance. It leaves a hollow stillness, the kind that forms when a young woman realizes that every polished gesture deepens the proof she does not truly belong. There is more to witness in how she learns to carry elegance as both armor and burden. At the edge of that quiet resemblance, another fracture in her sense of place begins to widen. Adulthood finds her with a discipline that has settled so deeply into her that she no longer recognizes it as instruction. It has become part of her breath, part of her posture, part of the quiet way she enters and leaves a room. She grows into a woman who moves with a steadiness learned from years of watching, listening, and adjusting. What others might call composure is, for her, a form of constant calculation, an instinctive awareness of what must be softened, what must be hidden, and what must never be allowed to surface. She carries her own interior life like something fragile, kept behind layers of practiced restraint. Ambition, in her world, is not forbidden outright. It simply has no place to go. She understands this long before she has words for it. Any desire that points upward is silently discouraged. Not through correction, but through absence. No opportunities appear for her to reach toward. No paths open. No suggestions hint at the possibility that she might one day shape her own future. She learns that wanting too much is dangerous, because wanting suggests expectation, and expectation from someone like her unsettles the balance others must maintain. So, she teaches herself to want quietly, or not at all. Dissatisfaction is even more carefully contained. When moments of frustration rise within her, sharp and brief, she presses them down with the same practiced control she applies to her gestures and speech. A tightened breath, a lowered gaze, a softened tone. These become her tools for survival. She observes how legitimate daughters can express displeasure without consequence, how their complaints are seen as personality rather than rebellion. She understands, equally clearly, that the same expression from her would be interpreted as insolence. So she hides displeasure with precision, erasing signs of it before anyone else can detect the flicker. Her tutors once guided her into restraint, but by adulthood, the restraint is self-generated. She anticipates expectations and meets them before they are spoken. She adjusts her presence to suit the room she enters. She measures her words not only for politeness but for safety. She learns which tones provoke curiosity, which gestures could be misinterpreted, and which silences might be mistaken for disapproval. Every aspect of her behavior is shaped by the awareness that a misstep, even an unintentional one, could shift her position into danger. The world she inhabits is not openly hostile, yet it demands that she remain unobtrusive. She feels this demand press against her daily. In gatherings, she stands slightly behind others, ensuring she never appears too central. In conversation, she contributes just enough to seem attentive, but never enough to suggest authority. In the household, she performs tasks gracefully, but without the efficiency that might draw too much praise. She is always present, yet always softened at the edges, careful not to leave a mark that might be remembered too sharply. This constant self-monitoring becomes both a habit and a burden. She grows skilled at observing herself from the outside, assessing how she might be perceived before others have the chance to judge. This self-surveillance sharpens her awareness of risk. She senses the tension in a room before anyone speaks, feels the shift in a conversation before it turns, and predicts the reactions of those who hold authority over her. These instincts protect her, but they also confine her. She cannot relax into her own identity because her identity must always be managed. Despite these constraints, she is not without strength. She develops a quiet resilience, the ability to endure without breaking, to remain constant even when the weight of expectation rests heavily upon her. She becomes a woman who understands the power of subtlety, of silence, of controlled presence. Her strength is not loud or visible. It is the strength of persistence, of navigating a world that recognizes her only when convenient and forgets her when necessary. There are moments when she wonders who she might have become if she had been allowed to express herself freely. The question passes through her like a distant echo, stirring something soft and aching. But she does not linger on it. She knows that the version of herself she imagines, bold, direct, unrestrained, belongs to another world entirely. The world she inhabits does not allow such possibilities, and so she lets the echo fade, returning to the steadiness she has cultivated all her life. The years shape her into someone others describe as serene, adaptable, and gracious. They do not see the effort beneath her serenity, the vigilance behind her adaptability, the quiet discipline that supports her grace. They see only the polished surface. unaware of the inner compression that holds it in place. She moves gently because gentleness protects her. She speaks softly because softness keeps her safe. She lives carefully because carefulness is the only form of freedom available to her. In this quiet adulthood, she becomes not merely a woman who practices self-control, but a woman who has woven that control into her very sense of self. Her restraint is no longer something she performs. It is something she has become. It leaves a muted tightening, the kind that forms when a life is shaped more by what must be hidden than by what may be expressed. There is more to understand about how she learns to survive through constant inward correction. Near the far edge of that quiet vigilance, another thread of her contained existence begins to pull taut. The news reaches her not with ceremony but with a quiet shift in the air. A change in the way people move through the household. The way voices soften in hallways. The way doors begin to close more often than they open. She feels the truth before anyone speaks it. The man whose distant protection shaped the edges of her life is gone. His presence was never consistent, never warm. Yet it held her world together in ways she understood only in fragments. Now that presence has vanished, leaving a space that feels sharper than absence. It feels like exposure. The first reality she senses is the sudden fragility of her situation. The invisible thread of support that once tied her to her father's household has loosened. People who once addressed her with polite restraint now carry an uncertainty in their eyes. Their gestures remain respectful, but something beneath the surface has changed. They are assessing risk, calculating responsibility, and wondering what obligations remain. She sees it in the way servants avoid extended conversation, in the way officials speak to her mother with rehearsed formality rather than deference. Without her father, everything that once held stable becomes negotiable. Protection, she realizes, was never hers. It passed through her father like a borrowed light. Now that light has gone out, and the darkness it leaves behind reveals how provisional her safety always was. The household that once sustained her begins to distance itself, not out of cruelty, but out of the practical instincts that govern noble life. A new heir must be acknowledged. New priorities must be established. She no longer fits into those priorities with the clarity she once did. Her presence becomes a question rather than an expectation. Her mother feels the tremor just as sharply. She moves through rooms with a controlled calm that betrays the fear beneath it. They speak little, not because they lack words, but because words offer no structure strong enough to hold what is happening. Her mother has lived long enough in the shadows of legitimacy to know how quickly a life can shift when the source of quiet protection disappears. She stands close to her daughter without touching her, as though any visible expression of solidarity might call attention to a relationship that must remain discreet. The changes begin immediately. Household accounts are reviewed. Support that once arrived quietly no longer appears. People who once visited with courteous regularity now come only when necessary. Invitations no longer include her name. Corridors that once felt familiar carry an unfamiliar chill. Decisions about her future begin to surface again, this time with a sense of urgency that presses against her chest. She realizes that the question is no longer when she will be placed, but whether there is a stable place left for her at all. Even the world outside the household seems altered. She feels exposed when she enters public spaces, aware that whatever invisible shield once surrounded her is thinner now. The knowledge of her father's death follows her like a shadow, carried in whispers. She cannot fully hear, but understands deeply. People speak of succession, of shifting influence, of inheritance, and estate transitions. Beneath these topics lies another truth. She, with her ambiguous existence, must now be addressed or quietly relocated. The night after the news is confirmed, she lies awake, listening to the unsettled stillness of the house. She feels the instability gathering around her like mist. She thinks of the small assurances she once relied on, the familiar routine of lessons, the subtle protection from unseen forces. the quiet but steady sense that someone powerful had an interest in her survival. All of these things have dissolved in the span of hours. The structure of her life has been held together by a man who never claimed her publicly, yet whose absence now shapes her world more profoundly than his presence ever did. What unsettles her most is how quickly these changes unfold. A single death shifts the entire axis of her future. What was once predictable becomes precarious. What was once sheltered becomes exposed. Her life, always delicate, now feels as though it could be altered by a single decision made without her knowledge. She senses that her place must be renegotiated, not by her, but by those who hold authority over the spaces she inhabits. She waits for these decisions with a quiet dread, knowing she has no choice but to accept whatever outcome is chosen. And yet, even in this moment of instability, she holds herself with the same composure she has been taught all her life. Her restraint is not merely a habit now, it is the only shield she possesses. She moves through each day with careful calm, understanding that any display of fear might hasten the choices others are already contemplating. She knows that uncertainty has become her closest companion, and that survival depends on meeting it with quiet steadiness. It leaves a fragile stillness, the kind that settles when protection disappears, and a life must balance on shifting ground. There is more to see in how she learns to endure the sudden unraveling of the world she depended on. Near that trembling uncertainty, another turn in her precarious path begins to gather shape. Life begins to narrow for her in ways that feel both quiet and final. The choices laid before girls like her are never truly choices, only paths shaped by circumstance and softened by polite language. Each direction carries its own form of disappearance, a way of stepping aside so that the world of legitimate lineage may remain undisturbed. She senses this early, long before anyone speaks of her future directly. The household's atmosphere shifts. Conversations shorten. Glances linger a little too long. These are the subtle markers of a life preparing to divide. The first path is the one most often recommended, becoming a quiet wife in a modest household, married to a man of low nobility or reliable service. Such a marriage offers stability, though never prominence. Her education makes her desirable in these arrangements. She knows how to manage a home, how to speak with restraint, how to behave in a way that reflects well on her husband. Yet she also understands that this form of safety is conditional. She would be cherished for her usefulness, not her lineage. Her worth would be measured in calm diplomacy, household skills, and her ability to remain unobtrusive. It is a life defined by steadiness, not recognition. The second path leads toward distant relatives, a form of survival built on quiet dependence. In these households, she would not belong, yet she would be tolerated. Her presence would be explained away as a gesture of familial duty or charity. She would become a figure who moves in the periphery, helping in small ways, learning to blend into the rhythm of a home that is not hers. This arrangement carries the constant reminder that she is a guest, sustained by the goodwill of others. With each passing year, she would feel the subtle erosion of identity that comes from living within someone else's story. The third path is the most silent, life within religious walls, not necessarily out of devotion, but out of necessity. Many daughters like her found refuge in convents, where the world's fixation on legitimacy mattered far less than discipline and order. It is a place where her name carries neither advantage nor burden. Inside those stone walls, life becomes structured, predictable, emptied of the social calculations that once dominated her days. Yet it is also a form of disappearance, an existence defined by prayer, routine, and distance from the world she once navigated cautiously. For some, it is peace. For others, it is surrender. She learns of these paths not through direct instruction, but through murmured discussions held just beyond closed doors, through the tense silences that follow conversations she is not meant to hear. The adults around her speak in practical tones, examining possibilities, weighing risks. She listens quietly, understanding that her future is being arranged like a piece on a board where she never had authority. Each option is designed to resolve an inconvenience in her existence, without stirring unnecessary attention. Despite the heaviness of these possibilities, she carries herself with the same controlled calm that has shaped her since childhood. She feels the uncertainty like a tight band around her chest, but her face reveals nothing. She has been taught all her life to move carefully, to speak deliberately, to exist gently in spaces that are not built for her. Now those lessons become essential. Her silence is not just a habit, it is a strategy. When she imagines her future, she does not imagine triumph or recognition. She imagines endurance. She imagines learning to breathe within whatever life she is given. She imagines carving out small moments of dignity in places that expect her to be grateful simply for being allowed to remain. She understands that each path is a variation of the same outcome, a life defined by quiet resilience, shaped by circumstances she did not choose, yet navigated with the steadiness she has cultivated. And in the stillness of these reflections, she begins to grasp something deeper. The world may not record her story, but she will feel every step of it. The erasure imposed on her does not diminish the weight of her experience. The silence demanded of her does not undo the complexity of her inner life. She is caught between options that lead away from visibility. Yet none can erase the truth of who she has become. It settles into her life like a soft verdict, outlining the gentle exits available to those who must disappear without protest. There is another layer to uncover in how she learns to inhabit a fate chosen by others. Across the hush of that quiet acceptance, a deeper reckoning begins to unfold. Learning does not shield her from the quiet erasure waiting beyond each carefully measured step. And the truth of that settles early, long before she has words for it. She grows with the faint rustle of pages as a constant sound, the scrape of quills, the soft recitations whispered in dim rooms where knowledge feels like a borrowed possession rather than an inherited right. The lessons are steady, neat, disciplined, and yet every line she copies seems to drift toward a future where her name will not be written anywhere. She understands this slowly, as though understanding itself was something she is not meant to hold openly. The houses she lives in change. The tutors come and go. But the same rule remains. She can learn anything, except how to secure a place that recognizes she ever existed. There is a stillness around her education, a carefulness that suggests boundaries more than promise. She reads scripture with calm patience, recites histories that never include children like her, and practices handwriting on sheets that will be discarded as soon as they are filled. The knowledge she gathers is tidy and controlled, arranged to make her seem accomplished enough to blend into respectable rooms, yet never significant enough to rise within them. When she sits at a small desk, straight-backed and quiet, it becomes clear that learning is less a path forward and more a curtain drawn gently over her origins. It hides what must remain hidden, even as it shapes her into someone who appears refined. Teachers praise her diligence, but their praise always ends with a pause, an unspoken note of uncertainty that she quickly learns to recognize. They treat her as someone temporarily entrusted to them, as though she is a name to be memorized only for a season. They instruct her in languages, etiquette, reading, and music, but no one ever asks about where her lessons will take her. That question, too heavy and too revealing, is never voiced. She senses that her education exists inside a narrow corridor, well lit, orderly, but with doors firmly shut on both sides. As she grows older, the gap between knowledge and acknowledgement becomes more visible. She observes how daughters of noble birth have their names embroidered onto linens, listed on household records, and mentioned proudly in correspondence. Her own writings are kept in a drawer that is often cleared. Her presence in a household is functional, useful, even pleasant at times, but always temporary. She is expected to learn and to behave as though learning grants her stability, while everyone around her behaves as though her stability should never be assumed. There are moments when the strength of her mind surprises even her teachers, when she solves a passage quickly or remembers a detail others forget. But brilliance does not alter her position. In houses tied to the whims of powerful men, intelligence is a candle, not a foundation. It glows briefly, gently, and then it is gone, leaving the room unchanged. She realizes that forgetting comes easily to people who depend on maintaining appearances. A girl like her must be remembered only when convenient. When circumstances shift, when alliances change, when a man's favor turns toward or away from her mother, the memory of her can soften into something vague and optional. In the evenings, she sits near windows where the last light sinks behind rooftops, and she reads quietly, lips barely moving. Books give her a sense of belonging that the world does not. Yet even this belonging is precarious. A book can be taken away. A room can be reassigned. A tutor can be dismissed. What remains is the lingering awareness that knowledge makes her graceful but not recorded, competent but not claimed. She exists in a kind of sideways shadow, shaped by learning but not strengthened by it. There are households where she is treated kindly, where the women look at her with something like pity, understanding too well the limitations placed upon her. But kindness fades with distance, and when she moves again, always quietly, always without ceremony, her memories travel with her. While the memory of her evaporates, she becomes a faint impression on a cushion, a handwriting sample left in an unused drawer, a name spoken only in private. Nothing more. Her mother tries to steady her future when possible, but the uncertainty is woven into everything. A mistress may be favoured for years, only to be pushed aside with shocking speed. A daughter in such a household is tethered to a kind of vanishing line. She may eat well, dress neatly, read widely, and still disappear from every formal record the moment circumstance demands it. Education softens the fall, perhaps, but it cannot erase the descent. What she fears most is the silent fading that comes not with cruelty, but with indifference. A life that slips quietly between pages that were never meant to include her. A memory kept alive only by the few who saw her in lamplit corridors, sitting with a book balanced on her knees. When she thinks about the future, she imagines rooms where she once breathed slowly emptying of her scent, her belongings, her presence, rooms that absorb her absence without resistance. It lingers through the story of her life, the quiet truth that learning could not hold her in memory. A shift waits beyond the silence, carried by what history chooses to remember and what it quietly discards. From that divide, another shadow begins to rise. History has a way of choosing what it wishes to carry forward, and she grows up slowly, learning that its choices have nothing to do with fairness. The story of her life is shaped by people who will never be written down. The tutors who corrected her hand without raising their voices, the attendants who watched over her lessons, the quiet women who guided her toward the adulthood the world expected her to enter. They shaped her mind, softened her manner, and taught her how to walk without drawing suspicion. Yet not one of them would ever appear beside her in memory. Their lives left no entries in the genealogies she sometimes saw displayed in great halls. Their names were not carved into stones or copied into records. Even the rooms where she learned from them seemed determined to forget. She begins to understand this absence in small ways. When guests spoke of noble daughters, they listed the fathers, the grandmothers, the alliances, and the marriages. But they never spoke of the women who actually raised those daughters day by day. The foundation of every polite conversation, every refined gesture, every measured breath came from people who were treated as transitional shadows. She sees this pattern repeated around her, girls of good houses learning from women who will never be spoken of again once the teaching is done. It creates a strange feeling inside her, like watching a building stand tall while knowing the stones beneath it will never be mentioned. Over time, she realizes that this silence is not accidental. It is built into the structure of the world she inhabits. Legitimacy is preserved through lineage, not care. A woman's mark on a child counts only when the bloodlines align with the expectations of the court. Anything outside that narrow line is quietly slipped aside. She learns this through observation long before she hears it spelled out. People speak the names of fathers with respect, and sometimes the names of mothers with ceremony. But the names of caretakers are allowed to drift away as though they were never spoken at all. Her own position rests in that same fragile space. She carries the refinement of a noble girl without the recognition that noble blood provides. Her intelligence, discipline, and training are treated as useful. Yet none of them is considered a foundation strong enough to anchor her to history. When she reads chronicles or family records, the absence feels almost cold, entire lives reduced to silence because they were not convenient to remember. It becomes clear to her that forgetting is not a failure of the record, it is a choice. She begins to question what this means for her own future. Even if she marries well, even if she fulfills every expectation placed upon her, the story that survives will not be hers. It will belong to the man she marries, to the children she raises, to the household that absorbs her completely. She will be a part of it, but not a subject within it. Her presence will help sustain the structure, but her name will not be allowed to rise within it. That reality sits with her in the quiet hours, heavy and unchanging. She wonders sometimes whether the women who raised her knew this truth about themselves. Perhaps they did, and perhaps they continued anyway, shaping each child with the kind of care that leaves no trace. She tries to remember their faces, but the years place distance between them. Certain details remain: the muted colours of their clothing, the calm in their voices, the way they held a book or corrected a line of writing. But the features blur at the edges, as though memory has already begun erasing what history refused to keep. This understanding shapes her as much as any lesson she was formally taught. She grows aware of the quiet erasure surrounding her life, an erasure that is both expected and accepted. The more she learns, the more she sees how deeply that silence runs. Education may sharpen her mind, but it cannot protect her name. Refinement may prepare her for noble rooms, but it cannot change the place where she stands. Yet she continues learning, continues observing, continues carrying the weight of what others chose to hide. She becomes a witness to the truth that nurturing, guidance, and quiet labour have no place in the histories written for kings. And she begins to understand why so many women disappear from the record long before their lives truly end. It settles around her like a calm that refuses to move. The knowledge that memory will not hold her as firmly as effort once held her upright. A deeper shift waits in the shadow of that truth, shaped by choices she did not make. Through that quiet stretch of darkness, something unspoken begins to rise. She grows into adulthood carrying lessons that were never meant to shine. Yet they remain steady inside her, like quiet instruments shaping the tone of every room she enters. Nothing about her life is recorded formally, but the gestures she perfected in silence move through households long after she has passed through them. Younger girls watch the way she folds her hands, how she lowers her gaze without appearing fearful, how her voice remains calm even when surrounded by uncertainty. These details, so small they seem almost invisible, become the first part of what she leaves behind. No clerk writes this down. No chronicler considers it worth mentioning, but the manner spreads all the same. She teaches without announcing that she is teaching. A cousin observes how she greets visitors. A neighbour's daughter copies the way she carries a tray. Servants notice how she listens without interrupting. She never claims authority for these impressions, yet they embed themselves in the habits of those around her. The rituals she learned under constraint become the rituals others repeat, as though they belong to the household's oldest traditions. She does not correct them. She lets them believe the customs were always there. Silence feels more natural to her than correction. Her presence influences a larger sphere as well. In gatherings, she instinctively smooths tension by adjusting her manner, letting restraint guide each word. The restraint itself becomes a kind of culture. Quiet, modest, precise. Over time, the houses she lives in adopt this tone without understanding its origin. Women who marry into the family begin mirroring her movement. Children are told to behave as she does. The men of the house, though slow to admit it, rely on her steadiness more than they realize. She becomes a quiet axis around which the household turns. None of this influence is acknowledged. If someone asked where a custom began, no one would think to speak her name. They would mention an older relative, a distant memory, or simply say it had always been done that way. She listens to these explanations without surprise. She has lived long enough to understand that the work done in silence is often treated as part of the air, necessary but unnamed. Still, she notices how small changes ripple outward. A girl she once tutored now teaches another. A habit she once developed to avoid suspicion becomes a norm for young women trying to appear composed. A phrase she used to maintain peace echoes in a dining hall years later. These traces are faint, but they continue even when her own position in the house becomes secondary or forgotten. She watches, knowing that legacy does not always appear as a story. Sometimes it appears only as a posture. The further she moves through life, the clearer the pattern becomes. She does not define the rules of society, but she shapes the texture of everyday life within it. Her influence moves quietly across generations of women who never know her story but carry fragments of her decisions. These fragments survive long after her name has faded. They survive because they are useful. They help others navigate households built on pressure and uncertainty. They soften edges. They have steady routines. They give form to spaces that otherwise might collapse under the weight of expectation. There is a muted dignity in this role, though she rarely allows herself to think of it in such terms. She understands that her life is not meant to be commemorated, but she also understands that the world continues because of the women who labor behind curtains, adjust their voices, rework their habits, and pass them quietly into the hands of the next generation. She knows she is one of them now, another figure in a long line of women who shaped homes without claiming ownership of them. She accepts this without bitterness. The silence surrounding her life has become familiar. But sometimes, when she watches a girl repeat a gesture she once learned under strict instruction, she feels something close to recognition, not of herself, but of the countless women before her whose influence traveled the same invisible path. It is not a legacy recorded in books, but it is a legacy that survives. It settles through her days. This truth that what she leaves behind continues even when her own story does not. A quiet shift begins to gather around that realization, waiting for a deeper reckoning. Through that gathering stillness, another unanswered weight begins to form. A life shaped by strict instruction reaches its quiet maturity with a stillness that comes from years of careful containment. Every movement, every tone, every expression has been trained into correctness, long before freedom had the chance to form its own shape. Expectations guided each step. Not ambition, discipline guided each word. Not confidence. The world she grew up in wanted perfection from her, yet never intended to grant her the recognition that usually follows such refinement. Correctness was a requirement, not a path. What rises before her adulthood is the unsettling truth that she has been fashioned for roles she may enact but never fully inhabit. The halls of the noble world are familiar. Its language, its decorum, its rhythm, but she walks through them without a claim. Legitimacy is not something she can earn. No matter how flawless her behavior becomes, bloodlines decide worth in this society. and hers draws an invisible line around her that no education can erase. Behind her lies the ordinary world, where life is defined by survival more than appearance. Yet, she does not belong there either. The quiet precision of her upbringing separates her from those who live without refinement, too polished for one sphere, too unofficial for the other. She remains suspended in a space that has no proper name. That suspension shapes her adulthood more deeply than any lesson she was taught at the table. People who benefit from her discipline often fail to acknowledge it. They rely on her steadiness in moments of tension, draw reassurance from her presence during negotiations, and trust her sense of order more than they admit. Yet when praise is spoken, it flows toward the nearest legitimate name, leaving her contribution floating silently behind the conversation. She is expected to remain agreeable, capable, and composed, but invisible when the moment for acknowledgement arrives. Marriage provides structure, not elevation. Becoming a wife may grant her a home, but not a place within the lineage of that home. Her name will not be honoured on family pages. Her presence will not be cited as an influence worth preserving. She may raise children whose futures depend on her discipline, yet she will not receive the recognition that legitimacy automatically grants to others. She knows this before the vows are spoken, and she accepts it because choices are limited for women in her position. Through the years, she learns to hold her thoughts carefully. Some truths are better kept silent, especially the ones that speak of desire or frustration. Whenever she looks at the structures that keep her in place, she understands that resistance would not grant her standing. It would only remove her safety. She has seen other women caught in similar positions, their stories disappearing the moment they stepped outside prescribed boundaries. Remaining within those lines becomes an act of survival, not agreement. Late in the evenings, when quiet returns to the house and the murmurs of the day fade, a private stillness allows her to examine the life she has lived. In that stillness, she senses the distance between what she has become and what she was allowed to be. The refinement she carries could have been a foundation. Instead, it remains a mask she has learned to wear. There is no bitterness in this reflection, only a steady acknowledgement of the truth. She was trained to resemble legitimacy, not to possess it. She observes the world's patterns more sharply as she ages. Histories are written around men of power, women of rank, and families of influence. The lines that matter are lineage, inheritance, and alliance. Her contributions, measured, careful, and constant, exist outside those lines. They will not be recorded. They were never meant to be. What she preserved inside homes, what she steadied in moments of tension, what she guided through quiet discipline will not find a place on any page. But understanding this does not diminish her composure. It strengthens it. Knowledge settles into her mind. She was shaped not for glory, but for continuation. People like her are tasked with filling the spaces that history overlooks, ensuring the world functions, even when it refuses to recognize the hands that keep it steady. Her presence supports the structure that refuses her name. She becomes one more silent figure in a long chain of women whose influence lived without acknowledgement. There are moments when she imagines a different life, one where her education could have granted her authority, where her refinement could have elevated her instead of confining her. But imagining does not change the path she stands on. Legitimacy is not awarded for effort, it is inherited by convenience. And convenience has never favoured a woman born as she was. Even so, her life does not dissolve into meaninglessness. Meaning is found in the steadiness she brought into unstable rooms, in the order she preserved through uncertainty, in the quiet strength she offered to those who leaned on her without fully seeing her. These are not accomplishments that register in official accounts, but they linger in the lives she touched. She understands this. She carries it without asking for more. Her story closes with the same calm that shaped every stage before it. She leaves behind gestures rather than monuments, influences rather than inscriptions, steadiness rather than recognition. The world continues, unaware of how much it relied on women like her, women trained to perfection, but denied legitimacy, women educated for a role that never truly became theirs. It rests over her life like a final curtain, the understanding that correctness could never grant the recognition she was shaped to embody. A last quiet breath fills the space between what she became and what she was permitted to be. Across that fading quiet, the echo of an unclaimed story drifts into the dark. And now the story settles into silence. The same silence that held so many lives like hers across the centuries. As you drift toward rest tonight, think of the countless women who walked carefully through worlds that never opened fully to them, who learned to carry knowledge without acknowledgement, and who shaped households, customs, and generations without ever seeing their names written down. Their presence may have been overlooked, but their influence remains steady, like a soft shadow across the edges of history. May your night be calm, and may your thoughts settle gently. Sleep well, and let the quiet strength of these forgotten women guide you into rest.